Hey, and welcome back to the Generation Next series. We're so glad that you are on this journey with us. And you might notice that we have some friends joining us here. And that's because we want to expand the conversation, literally invite you to the table as we have a conversation with you all about the future of the church. We are diving into the conversation that's really important, which is discipleship and mentorship strategies within the local church. This is something that Aaron and I talk a lot about in the Generation Next community, and we know this is something that you all are passionate about. Faith, I want to start this conversation by asking you a question. Mm-hmm. I know this is something that you have really done a great job of walking in as a young leader who holds leadership at a large church, and you hold the respect of a lot of senior leaders. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, I think one of the tensions we experience in discipleship and mentorship relationships in the church is that there seems to be a lot of miscommunication between generations, right? It feels like we're all saying the same things, but we're not speaking the same language.
We can't hear each other.
Exactly. Can you speak to that? Why is that? And what do senior leaders do who deeply want to invest in the next generation? How can they better do that?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. I think if I was coaching younger leaders, there would be a strategy that I would give them, right? Around like, how are you actually paying attention to the things that your older leaders are invested in or they care about? How are you using the language and the types of words that they're using commonly in their meetings and in their vision casting and things like that? So how are you adapting yourself in order to speak your older leaders' language?
Yeah.
But I think for older leaders, it's really important to create the space for that to happen for younger leaders.
Yeah.
For them to ask questions to actually do some of the work to explain, like, hey, when I'm talking about these metrics or these goals being important, this is what I mean. And in creating a space for a young person to ask questions about that. Because I think often as an older leader, we can just assume that everyone knows what we're talking about and they're up to speed, that like, of course, this makes sense, right?
Yeah. Right.
But for younger leaders, like we grew up in a different time, we grew up with a different vocabulary, and we care about different things.
Right.
And so it's not going to be top of mind that when you said X, Y, or Z, I was automatically thinking, oh, that's what that means.
Totally.
Right? So you, an older leader, need to do some work to help figure that out. I think the other thing though, is that the miscommunication between generations often comes from the way in which we think about like why something matters and what's important. And so as a younger generation, like we really have our sights set in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And an older generation, you might value that and see that it's important, but you're also holding other things as well. And younger leaders don't have the as broad of a vision maybe, or even as a broad of a responsibility, oftentimes in the roles that they sit in order to see like, you as an older leader, you do care about that thing, but you also care about 8 other things.
Right.
And so you have to create some like space for younger leaders to be really passionate about that thing without feeling like you have to obviously like disregard the other things that you're holding. Yeah. And that's a tension, but that's a tension for you as an older leader to hold. Yeah. Not to belittle a younger leader for not being able to see or step into.
That's great.
And they'll grow into that and recognize that at some point. That's again, like coaching I would give towards a younger leader is like, the thing you're really passionate about is not the only thing that your older leader is thinking through when making decisions.
That's great.
But also as a senior leader, it's important to recognize what that thing is that the young leader is important, and maybe start to think about that more than some of the other things. So if your younger leaders are really excited about evangelism strategies outside of your building, but managing your building is one of the things that you're thinking about, how are you starting to hold those things in tension and maybe letting the things that younger leaders are excited about start to outweigh some of the other things that you're holding?
That's fantastic. That's really helpful. Michael, you are somebody that I know have been marked by some leaders that invest in you, and you've had seasons in your life where you felt like you didn't have senior leaders investing in you. What would you say to senior leaders watching this, specifically maybe to young creatives in their church, about the kind of mentorship and discipleship that you've longed for, that maybe sometimes you've gotten and sometimes you haven't?
Yeah, quick story. I think when I first came back to the Lord and I was in my mid-20s, again, this was a really vital age for mentorship. Yeah. I took a spiritual gifts test because that's what all Christians do, right? To figure out what they're good. One of the things vocationally it aligned with, it said I was creative. I was like, no way. Really? And I remember going to like this speed dating for ministries within a very large church, and every single ministry available, especially the hospitality they always represent, was there minus the creative department. There was nobody there. And it was just frustrating to be in a room where I thought like the next step for me was to get involved and to serve. And there was no representation of that place for me at that time, where I was like, well, I guess I'll just go somewhere else, or I'll look again to the marketplace to serve by using my gifts and my creativity. So I think just having, as a creative, I'm really big advocate for making the space for creatives to be seen in your building, in your structure of leadership. Have representation at the executive level of creative. So somebody like a young 20-something can say, oh, there's a pathway for me in ministry if that's where I'm called to. Or there is other options besides being the pastor teaching on a Sunday. There's other ways to serve and use my gifts.
That's really great. I think that's so important.
Yeah, Hannah, I would be curious with your perspective. You know, you're a CEO of your own nonprofit. You do a lot of mentorship and coaching and training and developing. I would love to hear what you're seeing, what you're recognizing as effective mentorship and discipleship, and why even working for a parachurch ministry could actually help the church, the local church at large.
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to mentorship and discipleship, one of the things that I have been surprised at is how much of an option people think that it is.
Oh, wow.
When I look at the Great Commission, it feels very clear. Yes, it feels that there isn't much room for interpretation. When Jesus looked at his disciples, and he could have given them any words as his final, vision moment, he's giving these inspiring words, and he says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." And I just wonder if we as leaders, and especially as senior leaders, again, there's so many things that we're supposed to do. There's the budget and there's the vision. And now, as somebody who, even though I'm still young, I'm leading an organization, I think I empathize more with that. Like what you were saying, there's holding so many things where I'll have a young leader reach out, and it'll be urgent. This just happened earlier today. And they were like, "I need to talk to you right now." And I love that. And I appreciate that. And there's other meetings and commitments and budgets and board meetings. Like, there's realities that senior leaders are holding. I have empathy for that. And if I look at the example of Jesus, discipleship of people was simply something he didn't compromise on. And so I believe if we're going to fully understand how to reach the next generation, one of the best ways is to be in active discipleship relationships with them, because then we're so proximate to these young people. And even in this circle, we are all in our late 20s or early 30s, and we've all taken that seriously to start to disciple younger members of Gen Z ourselves. And so we all do that in different ways, right? Like, I think of Michael, you recently brought a young creative with you into a lot of the work that we're doing at Generation Distinct. And I've noticed that although to him, he probably isn't fully understanding what that is. I know in the car rides, you were having intentional conversations with him. And as a young creative who's 22, he has a space in the church at large to use his creative gifts in a way that you weren't able to, because you're creating space for that. That's mentorship and discipleship right there.
A quick testimony to that. He's in a really interesting space where he's interviewing for jobs. I'm like, don't go. And it's like secretly, because he's a brilliant young creative. And he's interviewing right now for a job in Seattle. I'm like, bro, like, go for it. Take it as far as you need to go. But he's like, but man, the community here that I've seen, it's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, I'm not going to pressure you. Definitely pray into it, but you're welcome here. You're seen here.
Isn't that amazing? And that's the power of a young person not being just connected to an organization, but to a person. Right.
And I think for senior leaders, here's the trick is you often think, I don't have time to do that.
Exactly.
And you don't actually need more time. You just need to invite them to the meetings with you.
That's great.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is what you're doing.
Right. What Michael's doing,
Yeah.
and I think we underestimate what younger leaders have the capacity to handle.
So true.
And even if they're not contributing to the meetings that you're in or the things that you're doing, invite them into the spaces and they're listening and they're paying attention and they're absorbing.
Yeah.
I think about, there's a girl that I disciple at our church. She's a senior in high school and she was sitting in the lobby of our church doing homework one day. Because her dad is on staff at the church. So she was sitting there doing homework and I was literally walking to a meeting. I was like, oh, Emily, we know, what are you doing? She's like, yeah, I'm just hanging out for a couple hours. I'm like, come with me to this meeting.
Yeah.
And she just sat there and I didn't ask her any questions in the meeting. She was just there. And then at the end, I walked her back and just asked her some questions. She was like, wow, I noticed these 3 things and that's so cool. And I feel so inspired. And why'd you guys talk about this? And what are we doing about she had so many thoughts and ideas.
So cool.
And now I get to the perspective of this high school senior speaking into the work that we're doing.
It's
and
huge.
She felt so excited. Her dad texted me afterwards, a couple days later, and was like, thank you so much for inviting her to that meeting. It was so good for her. And it didn't take me any time.
Right. Exactly.
Paid to be there, you know?
Exactly.
But it's just using the opportunities that you have and creating space for people.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think to that point, what you all are touching on is the power of integration.
Yeah, totally.
I think we do this really well in the local church. We create systems to silo volunteers to
That's so true.
It's efficient.
It is efficient.
Yeah. We silo even the executives teams. We silo the worship teams. And I think we are great within the local church when it comes down to siloing.
Yeah.
But I think the next generation, when it comes down to the future of the church, is how do we take those silos that are so beautiful, so compelling, actually very effective, but actually integrate them or cross blend them even with different groups of within the church to say, these people believe in me. These people help me feel seen, even as a volunteer. They invite my perspectives or my ideas to be heard. And so what if we could actually use mentorship and discipleship through integration to actually see the future of the church thrive into tomorrow?
Right.
I would love to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I love what you said about it's not so much about more time, but inviting people in, and that idea of integration. It can happen so seamlessly, right? I remember when I was about 17, I went from a very large church and my family started checking out this church plant. And so I went from, the mega church to 50 people in a cafeteria. And I was very confused, but I ended up loving it for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things looking back that I loved is in the early days, there wasn't enough people to have all the different ministries. And I was one of 2 high schoolers in the entire church. And so I just ended up at all of the adult events. And I grew so much in that season. Because when there was, the announcement for Wednesday night midweek group and it was 50 people were invited, I just assumed, well, I'm probably invited there too. Yeah. And that's actually the first place I ever heard the teaching that I should be discipling 3 people. That was what they would say. And again, I was 17, too naive to realize they probably weren't talking to me. And so I just said, okay. And I started discipling 3 middle school girls that I had met through the church. And that completely changed the trajectory of my life. Yeah. And so I think there's something powerful about noticing the young people who are ready for that next level and yet inviting them into spaces that they're technically aren't supposed to be in, like having fantastic systems, but being willing to break the mold to create space for the young people. So, Aaron, this is something that we talk about a lot. And I know you're really passionate about is if you see a young person who is passionate about being a pastor in your church, there might not be a system for it, but could you invite them to, just shadow a staff meeting? Or could you just invite them to, shadow you as you do a Sunday morning? And how do you walk around? And what does that feel like if you're a pastor, right? Or let's say you are a worship leader and there's that high schooler that always is hopping around in the front row, so passionate, so excited. Just invite them to hang out with you and get to know their heart and their story. Discipleship, the way that Jesus did it, was on the way, right? Jesus would perform a miracle and then he would take his disciples aside and kind of unpack it with them.
Yeah.
And that's where the transformation really happened.
This conversation is super important when it comes down to the next generation. I think it's close to their heart. It should be close to the hearts of senior level leaders. I think it's very important for the next generation to know that they can explore great relationships that are empowering authenticity and human connection. And so, Mims, I know you're really passionate about being an authentic leader. I think you carry yourself in such a inspiring way where you help young leaders around you actually see the heart of a leader. And so I would love to explore the depths of that. Talk to us real quick of how do you actually cultivate a heart of authenticity? We have a ton of senior level pastors watching right now. What would you want them to know when it comes down to the next generation and authenticity?
That's great.
I think part of it is from my own pain point. And again, when I was a 20-something, ambitious, zealous for the Lord kind of thing, when I heard the senior level pastor or the lead pastor, there was no access to them. And for some good reasons. You know, but there was no vision to like ever have a touch point or anything that would remarkably be close to a relationship.
Right.
And I think out of that, I remembered that moment. And I remembered even when I would work in the marketplace, like the CEO, the executive directors, like they were in offices all the time. And there was never a point where you could have a moment to just have a conversation or to throw an idea their way. And so as a leader that's now in my 30s, I'm not probably in the boardrooms yet, but I'm getting there. I'm kind of advancing my career that way. I reminded myself of what it means to be that 20-something-year-old. And we kind of talked about this the last time. Having more touch points for access. The more that you can be strategically and efficient in bringing those young leaders to the table, because it's not always efficient. Their ideas might derail a meeting. It might be a little bit of chaos, but I think that safety there is a place that you need to actually bring more young leaders into. And it's been a cool kind of shift in my perspective, because I think so often we get in those weeds and we want to keep moving the needle and to be slowed down, to have those meetings after the meetings and have the meals, and to have all the things again that you're already doing in your normal daily life, but slowing down just a little bit more for those inefficiencies.
One of my values, as especially a female in leadership, I'm really wanting to bring young females with me into spaces to raise them up, to invest in them, because I had women do that for me. So one of the ways that I've tried to do that is when I go to speaking events, if I know a young person that has gone through the Generation Distinct program and they're in that city, I'll oftentimes invite them to come shadow me for the entire time I'm speaking. So that's, yes, while I'm speaking, but also in the green room and also after. And there have been moments when I've been at conferences and my friends are there from different cities and they're the other speakers, and they'll come to me and say, hey, we're all going to go during this break in the conference and we're going to go out for eating, or out to eat, to decompress and just to chill. And I know they're going to go and turn off. And if I got to go with them, I could go turn off and take a break. But I have this 16, 17, 22-year-old person with me that is shadowing me and learning from me. And I say, no, I can't do that because I have to go, I'm going to go take this young woman out for dinner. And so the tension there is, yes, it's more exhausting. Honestly, it is. And there are moments where it feels really hard that I'm giving something. And yet it is more often the more real ministry that happens in those moments off stage than whatever I did on stage.
For sure.
And it is incredibly humbling to look back on my story and recognize the leaders that invited me in. And I didn't realize that it was an investment for them to do that with me. I thought it was easy. I thought I was fun to hang out with, but there is a certain amount of investment. And so I think the encouragement behind that is it does require some level of sacrifice and intentionality. And so I think the invitation for every senior leader watching this right now is, who is the young person in your community in your church, in your area, maybe even in your own family, who you can invite to be a part of what you're doing, to invite into the staff meeting, to invite to join you as you're going to your next speaking engagement, to simply sit around your table with your family. We have all been marked by leaders who have invited us into the real life, into the real moments of ministry, so much so that as young people, we're choosing to do that for the next generation. And I think that truly is a compelling way to continue to build churches for the future, is to invite the next generation into our lives. This has been a fantastic conversation. We're going to continue going on in some deeper topics as well. So make sure to stick around for session 3. We'll see you there.